So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down this beautiful, lush, ambient, dark sample that I made, and I could hear someone like Don Toliver or Kendrick Lamar on this, and it's just a very versatile ambient sample. I'm going to break down all the different VSTs, plugins, effects that I used to create this sample, and this is what it sounds like. So I just want to preface by saying that this sample was originally in F sharp minor, but I've pitched down the master down 2 semitones, so it's now in E minor. So yeah, I started with this piano melody, and this is from the main piano bank that I personally use. It's the Neue Felt in Contact, and I used the Jazzy Felt preset. And this is what the melody sounds like with no plugins. So it's actually quite a simple melody. If I was to take out a lot of these filler notes, it's basically this. And then all I did was take this section and I pitched it down 5 semitones. And that's just a trick that you can do, because if you take a melody and pitch it down 5 or even just a full octave down or up, it almost always works. So that's a very easy way to come up with a B section if you're struggling to come up with a way to make your melodies more interesting. I've been absolutely loving this Rev E compressor. It just gives it such a beautiful sound, and yeah, just compressing it. I added a bit of EQ with some pretty weird curves, but it was just where I found the frequencies that I like the sound of. So really kind of focusing on that low end, and also just some RC20, giving it some of that vintagey crackle and just distorted sound, and quite a bit of reverb. So and the thing I love about this preset, which you can hear, is you hear the like sort of the felts, the like, it sounds like a human's playing it, you know, it doesn't sound super digital, which is really nice when you are using digital VSTs. So just those little like sound effects just give it such a sense of realism, and it's just a very intimate sounding melody. So yeah, something almost a bit jazzy. Again, you can hear all that kind of like vinyl-y noise flare up there. But anyway, yeah, so that was the piano, and then I've layered it with this texture that's actually from my upcoming texture and phrases kit called MIRAGE. This is going to be out on April the 19th. There is so much in this kit, including sounds like this. So this was the sound I took, and then I just pitched it down 7 semitones, so without anything. So this is the same as the second one, but I think I just took the second half of it, or I just did that and time stretched it. Both of these have already been time stretched as well, obviously to suit the project tempo. I just added some EQ, cutting out some of the lows, and some delay and multi-band compression, just ducking a little bit of probably where the piano was sitting. So in context. And what I love about that texture and why I added it, there's just a lot of contrast to the piano. The piano is very soft and lush and ambient and just very intimate sounding, and then this texture is a lot more kind of distorted, and it just has that grit to it. So, and I just love combining, you know, sounds that are soft and beautiful with ones that are more dark and gritty. I think it just creates such a yin and yang sort of combination. So yeah, and then I have the bass, and I'm telling you, the bass is, you got to keep it simple sometimes. So I use the Modo bass VST, and this is my go-to bass VST because some very realistic sounds in here. Typically I like the violin bass, but I went for the thunder bass in this one, and this was literally the pattern that plays. Oh. Yeah, so keeping it simple, that's just following the root notes. And the one thing I do find with this VST is you can't really go to the lower octaves that personally I would normally be in. There, you see, like it, once you hit like that C1, like it just doesn't work. So I kept it up an octave. I usually do this when I use it. I bounced it out, and then here you can see I've sound shifted it down an octave. This also introduces some artifacts and just makes it a little bit kind of distorted and off sounding, but I actually quite like that sound a lot of the time. So you can hear that's a bit distorted. Some multi-band compression. Just kind of compressing, tightening the low end, just cutting out a little bit of the lows. But yeah, this honestly, I could have worked on that bass more, but I think it worked. And I added this VHS cassette. Now this is something I've spoken about before, but adding sounds that are ambient and sound like you're in a room or a certain setting, maybe outdoors, there's nature sounds, whatever it is, can add so much depth to your samples. Now, context matters. This is a very intimate, dark, soft sample. If this was something that was really energetic and there's lots of synths taking up lots of frequencies and there's a lot going on, I don't think it would make much sense to have a lot of these kind of room or cassette VHS sounds going on. They make a difference in samples like this. So here's without the VHS cassette sound, and then with. And then with. Like just that subtlety, I think, adds such a nice layer of depth to the sample. So moving on to the next section, I've taken the exact same piano melody and put it onto this synth. Now, funnily enough, this synth is actually a bass preset that I really like within Diva. It is from the Tyrell collection. It's the Warm Sub, and because this isn't like a poly synth, which just means it can play multiple notes at once, like you can't really play chords, this piano melody, you can see it's kind of like strummed. So what happens is it kind of arpeggiates and just follows the next note in line, and you'll hear what I mean here. Quickly, I just want to say I've got a little bit of halftime on here, some reverb, quite a bit of reverb and delay, just to make it very washed out sounding, and some EQ, just cutting out a lot of the highs. But listen to this. It's just so like bubbly, and it's just, I love the contrast between this and the first section where there's a bit more grit. So I bounced that out, and yeah, I just added some multi-band compression just where some of that bass was cutting into. Also added some of this RC20, just making it a bit wide, and some EQ, just cutting out a few harsh frequencies, and some Pultec, also cutting out some more lows. It's just an EQ as well. And I have this one little texture here which I've just reversed, and it sounds like this. Keep in mind this has also been pitched down to match the project tempo. I've added a bit of saturation, some portal, and this is the particle dispersal, so this just gave it some extra sort of artifacts. So I'll just play it, and also it's just some delay and a bit more EQ. But and then without. So it's very subtle, but you can kind of hear it's just a bit more like there's more of those like kind of particles, and obviously it's just like a 50% mix, but it's just enough to, you know, add that little bit of detail. So using that swell to lead into the next section, which is very similar to the first. So yeah, the piano in this section is pretty much identical to the first. I think I just removed a few filler notes just to kind of simplify it a little bit. And then I've taken this texture, which was a synth texture from Splice, which I chopped up a bunch. So you can see I have a lot of plugins going on here. And this is what it sounds like without anything. Keep in mind, this is still chopped up and I've time stretched it. I don't know if I even I've even reversed these as well. So if I do use Splice, generally I like to do as much as I can to chop the sample to make it sound a lot more original and interesting, and also to potentially avoid any kind of copyright infringements, because even though they're royalty-free sounds, some people will claim them as their own or use Content ID, and sometimes using that identical melody or loop that you get on Splice can sometimes be flagged. So I just like to play it safe, especially when it comes to my own samples. And without sounding too elitist, I think it's great practice, and just for the sake of the craft, to take these pre-existing sounds, say, that you find on Splice, and to chop them and make them as original as you can. So that's something I like to do to kind of push myself. So this is what it sounded like. So it's a bit of a random, almost like dubsteppy industrial sound. I don't know. It's not something I think you'd imagine on a sample like this. In fact, definitely not if you hear the piano. Like, they're very contrasting sounds, but again, it's that kind of yin and yang. It's that contrast between something that's lush and beautiful and something that's gritty and distorted. So first thing I did was pitch it down 5 so it matched the project. A little bit of actually that's delay, not reverb. So I forget, Supermassive is also a delay. I added that. I added EQ, just cutting out some of the lows. And something to keep in mind is often if you're going to use a reverb or a delay, it's going to tend to like ring out, wash out. It's going to ring out the low end as well. So I like to tidy things up by adding an EQ, just cutting out some of the lows after I've used a reverb or delay most of the time. And then I've just used a multi-band compression, which I've used the expand setting on this, which I usually use on the high end. That's just going to make it sound a bit wider, a bit more washed out, which much of this sample is. Added a bunch of RC20, added some of the pancake as well, which just made it pan. So it's very subtle. Added a bit more compression just from the Rev E, and just even more EQ, cutting out even more of the lows. Again, after using quite a few different elements and plugins, sometimes there tends to be new artifacts that have been created, and they might be in like the low end, which wasn't initially. And then I've just got this sort of same like swell type texture going on here. So, and that's actually a sound from my Mirage texture kit that's coming out, but again, chopped it up. I think I reversed it. I added pretty much the same effects, just a bit of multi-band compression, I think some reverb, and yeah, actually a lot of reverb, and made it pan. One thing worth noting though on the reverb with this texture compared to the other ones is I've made the width really small, so it sounds a lot closer. Same with the delay, it's really short, and because the mix is so high as well, it's going to really contrast with the really washed out sounds. This one's going to sound a lot closer and like it's in a room. So if you can kind of hear that difference here. Leading into the next section. And I don't often like use leads and stuff from Splice, but this was one that I got, which I chopped in the middle, I reversed, and without any plugins it sounds like this. Keep in mind this is still time stretched. Yeah, so it's a really nice melody, but again, just trying to be a bit more original. So I reversed it, which made it sound like this. then I pitched it up 9 semitones, so yeah, quite a difference. And then EQing out a lot of the lows up to 500 hertz, adding some halftime. And you'll notice that, like I explained before, adding something like halftime is now introducing more of these low-end artifacts. Obviously, listen. See, now there's more low end. So this is why I like to use EQs, which you can see I've added at the end of this chain to cut out a lot of those lows. Unless you want to keep it, but it's something worth keeping in mind because most often your mixes are going to sound muddy when it comes to those like lows, the low mids in that frequency range. So that's that. I've got a bunch of RC20, kind of the same settings as always, other than I've made the width really small and kind of like close sounding. So as opposed to if I made it really wide, it sounds good as well. So you see, it just sounds a lot more intimate, which is, I think, kind of the theme of this sample. Added a bunch of reverb and yeah, some portal. I think this is, yeah, the 4th shape pan, so it's just giving it this chop texture. Very subtle, but it just helps give it some rhythm. So yeah, and then bringing back that same texture from earlier from my kit and the bass. It's a really simple sample. There's not a lot of layers, and it's just what gives it so much space and room for someone to add drums onto it, to add vocals. And leading into the last section, it's even more bare bones. So and this last section, I've just left very bare bones and minimal, because if someone wants to add drums or just wants some variation, that's a section where there's a lot of space where the 808 is probably really going to cut through. And yeah, it's just an extra thing that they can use. And it's just an extra, again, variation that they can use. So that is the sample. Again, it's been pitched down 2 semitones. I've added some multi-band compression to the master. I've cut out some of the lows, dipping some of the harsher frequencies I found. Here I'm boosting the side information, so as opposed to the mids or the stereo, just kind of making it sound a bit wider. And my go-to mastering plugin, the ARTG mastering plugin, I've made it a bit wider on the spreader, and then I've boosted more of the mids here. Lastly, just a limiter, just to make sure I'm not going above, well, in my case, minus 0.2. That just means I know that this sample is not going to be clipping. And that's pretty much the sample. And something I want to reiterate when it comes to sample making or making any kind of track is there's a lot of trial and error. And for as simple as this sample is, in my opinion, you can see if I scroll down lower, I was messing with a bunch of these different vocals, which I'll actually flick through a few of them just to give some context to like what I was messing around with and what I was going to try and chop. You can see I've already added a bunch of plugins, so let's see. I mean, it's not bad. I think it does work, but yeah, I just wasn't crazy about it. And I think the important takeaway is that, you know, you should experiment, obviously, with trying a bunch of different things, but sometimes it's better to just keep it simple. In fact, I would argue most of the time it's better to keep it simple. I think that is forever the bane of a producer. And not to say like there aren't amazing beats or samples that are more complex or virtuosic, but I suppose it's essentially sound selection, just knowing what is actually needed and what isn't. Like if you're cooking and you're making a meal, sometimes you make that meal a lot worse. In fact, oftentimes if you just start throwing in 20, 30 different seasonings, you could pick out 50 seasonings that on their own are amazing flavors and taste great. but throwing 50 seasonings into one dish is not going to sound good. And it's the same thing. I mean, we do literally say we're cooking up, right, as producers. And I think that's where focusing on simplicity, asking yourself, do I really need this layer? Does this make sense? Does this need to be here? Can I still evoke this emotion without this layer? Ask yourself these questions. And I'm saying that to myself as well, because I still struggle to not overdo it and add things that aren't necessary. So the main focus, really, the main takeaway I think with the sample is not only to keep it simple, but have contrast. So the piano, it's soft, it's ambient, it's lush, and then contrasted with these textures that are more distorted and gritty sounding. I think it creates more interest. And then lastly, just including things like VHS cassette sounds, room noise, ambience, it could be outdoors, birds, anything like that will add a lot of depth to your samples, provided it's a sample where it works. So conversely, those things might not work on like a hyper pop track, something that's really energetic and loud, you know, some like kind of trippy red or like Playboy Carti type beat. You're probably not going to be too focused on trying to distinguish like those little room noises. There's too much going on. But for samples like this, where it's a bit more bare bones, there's a lot more space, it's a lot more ambient, it makes a lot of sense, and it can just be such a cool hack to create a lot of depth in your melodies. So I have many more samples like this that I would love to break down and show you guys, so just let me know if that's something you want to see. I also would love some suggestions on different genres or styles you want to see me create, because I want to be experimental. I want to push myself and try new things and explain and show you guys how I do that. It just brings me so much joy. And my texture and phrases kit, like I mentioned, is full with like 200 sounds, all perfectly labeled with the tempo, the key. So all you have to do is literally just click and drag it into your projects. All the sounds are royalty free, so you can use it in your work. And my kit Mirage is going to be out on the 19th of April, like I said, so that'll be in the link below if it's out already. And yeah, until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.